This is episode number 32 of the Gruler Nation podcast. My name is Robert Gruler. I am joined today by Renée Siegel. Renee is a counselor. You are an expert in the Enneagram. You've been in the field for 41 years. Recently became certified as a life coach. We have a lot to talk about today. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining the Gruler Nation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the first thing that I noticed when we got you scheduled was all of these different letters behind your name. There's a lot of them. You've got MALISAC, ICGC-2, BACC, LMT, HHP, CPIC, and there's probably more that aren't on that list.
It's an LMNOP, right?
LMNOP, exactly. Yeah, I love it. Tell me a little bit about them. So what's your background? What are all of these letters? Where did you kind of accumulate all of these?
Well, I finished a master's degree many moons ago in marriage and family therapy in Detroit, Michigan, before I moved to Arizona about little over 30 years ago. And my quest was to find out why people do what they do and how they get along and what keeps them from getting along. And that was kind of like the umbrella set of questions that I was interested in. And growing up in a very Western medically modeled family where everybody that sat around our table in extended family was some form of doctor, and they never looked very healthy to me, I wondered, how can you be a doctor and look the way you do, or eat the things you do, or chain smoke, or drink too much, or whatever? And my quest was really how people can get healthy, how they can stay healthy, why they get along. So it was this big umbrella thing. Starting out with a master's in marriage and family therapy, I realized that talking therapy doesn't work for everybody. And I realized that some people aren't coupled and still have a lot of work to do on themselves. So I went out and got some certifications and licenses in other areas and collected some life experiences that required me to get some more information and training in other areas. And I am really a committed lifelong learner. So the initials really, as summary, are kind of a body, mind, and spiritual approach. I am a licensed massage therapist, a holistic healthcare practitioner, most recently a life coach because it allows me to have a basket and put all those pieces together in there. A licensed substance abuse counselor, there and on and on. There are other things that are not even on that list.
I'm sure, yeah. Yeah, it was funny when I was putting together. So this is being recorded on video. Also, I had to like shrink the font to add in all of your letters, and I thought that was great. I mean, I'm excited to talk to you because you obviously know what you're talking about. So you just became certified as a life coach. When did that happen?
About 3 months ago.
Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
And life coach is kind of one of those terms that I think is thrown around a lot today. A lot of people want to become life coaches, but they don't really have much experience. They don't have any credentials. They don't have any formal training or formal education. And you very clearly do. My question to you is, because you have all of these different sort of experiences, all these different trainings, and the background that's so multivariate, how do you, or what's kind of the focus of your practice today?
Well, the focus of my practice is trying to help people raise their self-awareness to take a look at what gets in the way of them getting what they want. And that's a question that's more easily answered through coaching than it is counseling. Counseling oftentimes is seen as an archaeological dig. We talk about your family, we talk about background, we talk about life experiences, and oftentimes people can stay in therapy for years, because the counselor, the therapist's responsibility is to join the person where they're at and not necessarily respond to building architecture or building on things to help them move forward. So coaching is a response to somebody coming in with a specific request, wanting to build architecture or solve a problem. And I can certainly use the skills that I've had from counseling, but I think coaching really allows me to park all of the things that I love to do. And by the way, there are lots of ways to become a life coach, but I went through, as you can imagine, because of being a lifelong learner and my interest in being respected and an expert in my field, I went to a long life coach, internationally certified life coach program, certified through the International Coaching Federation.
Yeah. So it was more than just taking an internet course and printing off a certificate.
It was a lot more than that.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, and that's great. And I think the reason it's become so kind of popular in recent years, this idea of coaching, is because it is a little bit more about beginning with the end in mind a little bit. You know, you're more thinking about, this is what I want, this is where I want to go. And traditionally in counseling, it's not so much about that. It's just kind of about having a conversation. And I I've never had a life coach, but I can definitely see the value. I've had a lot of business coaches and other things. So I'm glad that's where you're going with it, because I think you can provide a lot more value. One of the tools that we talk about, or that you talk about specifically, is this tool called the Enneagram. And I want to dive into that because I know there's a lot of meat there. This is something you're very passionate about. You've been doing it for, I think, 15 years.
I have. And the Enneagram is was like a game changer for me. It was like a golden find. About halfway through my career, a little more than halfway through my career, I was introduced to the Enneagram. And the Enneagram really refers to a map of 9. I think we have a diagram that we can share so people know that that's what we're referring to when we say the Enneagram. So
I'm holding it up.
Yeah.
Walk us through what this is.
So this is a map of the Enneagram, and it came into being the way that it exists today through a series of steps. Initially, it was carried down as a verbal tradition in spiritual disciplines, and even in ancient wisdom traditions prior to even the formation of any of the major world religions as we know them today. So spiritual teachers that were deemed worthy of holding this information were given information about various obstacles that kept people from feeling a connection to their creator or their maker or their source. And as the map that you are looking at today is a variation of a map called the Enneagram of Personality, which was brought into probably the greatest awareness through a man who recently passed away, a Chilean psychiatrist by the name of Claudio Naranjo. And he studied with a gentleman in Chile, Arica, Chile, named Oscar Ichazo, who was also I believe, a psychiatrist. And they were looking at how this spiritual system really had great value in addressing cognitive emotional patterns or psychopathology. And so these 9 types, Ennea is the Greek word meaning 9, and gram is a reference to the fact that we're looking at a diagram.
I was just going to ask you what it meant.
Mm-hmm. So Enneagram, that's what the word means, comes from Greek roots. And this modern map or this modern diagram that you see really synthesizes patterns of cognition or thinking, patterns of emotions, and patterns of reactivity, and identifies that unmet childhood needs along with the room for essential spiritual qualities help us to form personality. And personality, which is nothing more than just a strategy to manage life.
Yeah.
That's what personality is. We are not personality. We are stardust. We could use the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Yeah,
we are stardust. We are golden. We are essential qualities. We are an aspect of God. That's what we are. But how we walk around in our bodies every day and express ourselves is through these patterns of behaving and of thinking and of feeling. And the Enneagram is a tool that allows you to take a look at each one of those specific patterns and choose the one that you have kind of identified with most, and then loosen that structure so that you have a greater access to self-awareness. I know that's a lot.
It's a lot, but there's a lot of wisdom in that. So is it this concept that you are? So let me explain what the diagram that I'm looking at is for the audio only people. It's a circle, and at the top of the circle you have the word body. At the it forms a triangle. Then you've got head at the bottom left, and then you've got heart at the bottom right. And in around the perimeter of the circle, you have numbers. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 1 is starting in the 1 position like it would on a clock, and it goes around. 9's back up at the top like a 12 position, at the 12 position. And then the numbers are equidistant around. And then you've got these arrows that are within the circle and connecting the numbers as they cross over the circle. So you've got from the 1 position, it's going down to the 4 position. Then you've got from the 3 position, it goes up to the 9 position, and so on and so forth. And it forms these different triangles, and it's showing these different relationships. And so are you, what is that activity that we're looking at? There's all these arrows that are bouncing back and forth. So what is that symbolizing?
Well, the circle symbolizes that although we land on one particular strategy or personality type or one of those 9 numbers, that we each have aspects of every one of them in us. And we can go around the circle if you'd like, and I'll talk about that in a little while.
Sure.
So that's what the circle exemplifies. The body, heart, and head that you are referring to are what we would talk about as 3 ways to access information. So we have body wisdom. Clearly, our senses in our body inform us of a lot of things. Our heart beating really fast informs us of something. When we get little creepy crawlies on our skin, we have a sensate experience to something. Our heart informs us of things. When we have a large emotional experience, our heart holds valuable information, and clearly the head has probably received the most attention, at least in our society, in terms of facts and wisdom and things like that. If we were to look at ancient peoples a long time ago, they valued the information that they accessed through their bodies and through their hearts just as much as they accessed information that they got through their head. And I know this may sound kind of strange, but the best hair days on the planet are when all 3 of your centers of intelligence are turned on at the same time.
Yeah. But people are sort of trained to be out of touch with some of those other things.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who just say, I can't get out of my head, right? They're just living in their head all day, and they're not accessing what sounds like those other areas.
Yes. And no matter what type you are, even if you fall into a body or a heart center, our society really promotes us staying in our head.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what the circle is symbolizing. And then is that also what the arrows are symbolizing? So say, for example, you've got a 9, which is at the top of the circle, which would be like a 12 position on a clock. You've got an arrow that goes down to a 6, and then from the 6 over to the 3, and it forms a triangle. And so the 9 is closely aligned with the body, somebody who's kind of in touch with their body, or how does that work?
So there are 3 types within each one of those triads.
Okay.
Within the body triad, the 8, 9, and 1 reside.
Okay.
And they have a particular way of seeing the world or managing the world through trying to find some power and control in the world. And they also have a very distinct way of managing discomfort through either an expression or a repression of anger around issues of power and control. So each one of those 3 flavors in the body center, the 8, 9, and 1, have a distinct way of seeing that they're able to manage their life through power and control and managing anger. The 2s, 3s, and they respond, their personality has, back to the body types, their personality has become such because of an unmet childhood need of not being heard. And so there's issues of correcting things, melding with things, injustice. I mean, this is way more advanced than you can talk about without really sitting down and working with someone. The 2s, 3s, and 4s have an unmet childhood need of not being seen. In some way, their image, their reputation, their desire to be validated, acknowledged, and recognized was amiss. And there are 3 different flavors within that triad of expressing the need to be seen. And the way that they deal with discomfort is through a sense of panic. And the head types, the 5s, 6s, and 7s, have an unmet childhood need of needing to be safe. and they have 3 expressions of a need for safety, security, and certainty, and they deal with that through primary emotion of a relationship with straight out fear. And so these arrows and the lines that you're seeing and talking about remind us that we access all of those areas, each one of us does, in a state of relaxation or in a state of stress. When we're relaxed, we move in one direction, and when we're stressed, we move in another. And as you hold that up, and I know the people at the audio can't hear this, but as you hold that up, you'll see that there are points that reside on the side of any of the types. So on the side of a 9 resides an 8 and a 1. On the side of a 4 resides a 5 and a 3. So those are called wings. And if you think of the metaphor of an airplane being an aerodynamic experience, we need 2 wings to fly. And so we have access, each one of us, even though we land on one type, have access to points on the Enneagram and to move in certain areas through arrows on the Enneagram to aspect the types. This is where we give some great acknowledgement and respect to the fact that we really have some aspects of each one of those types within us, although we have a primary experience. One last thing about the unmet childhood needs, we each within any one of us have all 3 of those needs: to feel safe, a need to feel heard, and a need to be seen. But one of them emerges as primary when our personality is formed. So again, we're talking about this primary expression that really has us functioning or managing strategically in life with one type, but with the incredible elegance in this design of accessing far more than our type.
Right. So what's the process of, so you said that people will kind of fall into one primary type, one of those numbers. What's the process of somebody identifying what that is?
That's a great question. And there's probably a lot of answers to that, but I'll give you the best one that I know. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
So there are 2 primary schools of learning the Enneagram, and then there are a lot of offshoots of different schools too that teach the Enneagram.
Okay.
And one of them is called the Enneagram Institute, and the other one is called the Narrative Enneagram. And I was trained through the Narrative Enneagram. We lost one of our beloved teachers, Dr. David Daniels, a Stanford psychiatrist who had the guts to go to the Stanford Department of Psychiatry and introduce this system years ago. And right now, it's being really validated with Dan Siegel's work on the neurobiology of type. He actually knows the Enneagram and knows that neurobiologically infants, we can recognize some of these patterns in infants from the get-go, which means that it's not just about collecting life experiences. We came in with something or some purpose, some message that we
were born with.
Exactly, which is pretty cool. Kind of really.
Yeah,
I think it's
that's
heavy.
That's heavy stuff. Yeah.
So but it speaks so much more than a Myers-Briggs or some other personality system, because we're now looking at meaning and purpose in our life, and the core motivation for why we might do what we do, which is kind of a much grander experience. So if one were to want to know their Ennea type, to find out their type, you can work with someone through a typing interview, or you can take a series of online assessments. There are a bunch of them. If you were to just Google the word free Enneagram assessments, a bunch of them would pop up. The major difference in the approach between the 2 schools that teach the Enneagram Institute and the Narrative, is that the Narrative does exactly what it says. They go to the narrative. They listen to the person. So, for instance, if I were to want to know your type, I would ask you a series of questions, but I would be listening for your answers to those questions, and then having you reference the things that other people who have narratively answered those questions in similar ways to take a look at those patterns. But you would ultimately make a determination yourself of what type you are. And landing on your type is a really cool journey, because every time you look at another aspect of your type, you're growing your self-awareness. You're learning something about yourself, and it's not because a coach or counselor told you that was the case. You really have to go inside for that answer. So can I use an example?
Please.
So if we were to ask a group of people, how many of you would like to be good people, the majority of the people would raise their hands. I want to be a good person. Right? Now, if we were to ask the question, could you tell me why it's important for you to be a good person? you would not get the same answers.
Sure.
You'd get a variety of answers, and based on those answers, we could really find out why it was important for them to do that, what was kind of running the show, what might happen if they weren't a good person or didn't see themselves as a good person.
Yeah. Okay, and so the test or the process of identifying what type you are is by kind of diving into those deeper questions.
Yes.
Because my question or my initial thought was, well, if it's one of those things where people get to have a say or have a voice in what they are, people want to be something that they self-identify with that makes them feel good about who they are, how they're living their lives. So they're going to go, I like how that one sounds. That sounds like me. But is that accurate?
I had that journey.
Yeah.
I had that journey, so I'm going to share a little bit about my journey because it's kind of an excellent example of what you were just talking about. So I'm a mother of 6 children.
Okay.
And when my 6th child was old enough to get a job, I was ready to do like a dance. I mean, I can't even tell you. I was a widow. I raised 6 kids by myself.
Wow.
And it was like, by the time she got her driver's license and was ready to go to work, it was like, let me hand you the keys. Did you really pass the test? That's good. Let's get on with life.
That's great.
And so this is about the time that I was introduced to the Enneagram, which was 15 years ago. And I was at a time in my life where I was exercising my freedom. I went to Hawaii. I went to Alaska on a cruise. I went to Europe. And I went to visit a series of friends. Now, this is a person who hadn't done a lot of traveling. I had paid for my kids to go to travel. Many of them had gotten scholarships to study abroad. They'd been all over the world, but I was the cheerleader sitting at home doing that. And this is when I took my test. So I took this test at a time in my life where I was traveling all over. I was eating popcorn for dinner because I didn't have to make dinner for kids anymore.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I was doing things that
You're living the life.
That was totally atypical of my life experience and my personality as it generally expressed itself. So I'm answering all these questions on my Enneagram evaluation and assessment, and it's coming up with this type 7, which is the type that's considered the epicure, somebody that wants to taste everything and try everything, and they're adventurous, and they bling from one idea to another, and this is how I tested. So I came back to my Enneagram teachers because I decided pretty early on that this Enneagram stuff had a hold of me, and I wanted more and more and more information. And as they began to ask me questions about what really was running the show, it's like, what's the most important thing in your life? My family. Why is your family important to you? Well, isn't family important to everybody? I'd live or I'd die for my family.
Right.
Anybody tried to hurt my kids, I'd probably harm them.
Right.
I mean, and all these things were coming out that had absolutely nothing to do with being an epicure. But at that point in my life, I was expressing behavior that looked very epicureal or Epicurean, whatever the word is for Epicurious, maybe. And in fact, I am not. I'm a type 2. I'm a helper. Counselors and coaches oftentimes find themselves in that. Nurses, good mommies. I mean, that's a kind of a nurturing mama bear kind of type to be in often. And that's really where I landed when I was really taking a look at the essential characteristics or personality structure that I had, and not what was being shown or demonstrated at that particular snapshot in time.
Okay. So does that mean that people are more fluid?
No, it means that you really need to answer the questions based on your total life experiences or early life experiences, because as we go through life, we accumulate life experiences.
Yeah.
We become seasoned, we collect situations, we move through them. Hopefully we've grown a little bit. But if we were to answer the questions as though we were in our early 20s, even if you were to answer these questions as though you were in your early 20s, you think you might answer them differently?
Definitely.
Yeah. So, than you have today.
Yeah. So people aren't necessarily bouncing around between these different categories. They're answering them. I guess I'm trying to understand, because we had the original point that you made that people are sort of born with some of these innate qualities,
right,
that will follow them throughout life, but are you saying people will fall into a certain category but exhibit, like in your example, right? You're a type 2, but you're exhibiting kind of traits of a type 7, I think you said it was.
Right.
But that's just based on your kind of where you're at in your life, but you're not actually changing your fundamental.
That's exactly right. So if somebody were to stop me during my travels and ask me questions about myself, I would clearly answer the questions as a type 2. Although I might be behaving and doing things in those particular situations. But if we were to look at what is driving, what the driving factors are, the underlying core motivations for what I was doing, how I was enjoying, what I wasn't enjoying, it would totally be, I would have revealed myself as a 2.
Yeah. So there's some nuance there.
Yeah, so topically you can look a particular way, and that's why it's so important that the person types themselves.
Right. That's interesting. Okay, well, can you walk us through them?
Sure.
Yeah, walk
Sure.
us around the circle and let's learn a little bit more about each type.
So I like to start with type 8 because even though it's not at the top and the 9 is at the top, or we could chronologically start with the 1, the type 8 is the first of the body types.
Okay.
And when you think about the first thing to develop and what holds us together as human beings, we have a body. And the body has sensate experiences. So I just like to start there. So the type 8 is given a lot of names in different Enneagram traditions, but we'll talk about it as the boss or the maverick or the entrepreneur or the protector. And the type 8 is can be a pretty intimidating individual. They're the only type on the Enneagram that has a true level of comfort with anger, a very full-bodied expression of anger. And so consequently, what they consider exuberance or having a lustful platform, not just a sexually lustful platform, but just a lust for life kind of platform, others may find intimidating or bullying. And they consider it playful because they just came into the world with that level of exuberance and energy and drive. And that doesn't mean that other types don't have that, but this type particularly expresses its sense of a need for power and control through a direct expression of anger and a comfort with anger that most other types don't have. Very comfortable with conflict, very comfortable with bring it on. They'll ratchet up oftentimes if you ratchet up in either a sense of playfulness or in a sense of I can be angrier than you. And there's a lot of types that might find that uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our type 9 is called the peacemaker or mediator, and they have a relationship with a need for power and control. What they do is they go along to get along. They merge with other people's interests. So they're the most conflict-avoidant type typically on the Enneagram, the easiest to get along with, and the most self-forgetting. So they might have a lot of desire, or maybe even a forgetfulness that they have a desire to get along with people, and then all of a sudden find themselves, let's say, eating at a restaurant. So let's say, we say, where do you want to go to eat tonight? And they go, I don't care. And you say, okay, well, would you like this? And they might say, sure, I'll go along. Let's have Chinese food tonight. And they get into a Chinese restaurant, and they really didn't want to have Chinese food.
Yeah.
But it was far more important for them not to rock the boat because the angst around rocking the boat is too much. And the importance of melding and merging with other people's interests is more important than rocking the boat. Now, that being said, 9s can be really, really, really stubborn. If they have a particular belief or feel like they're pushed into a corner, they may dig their heels in and not budge. And so we all probably have friends or family who are that type. We think they're just kind of really easygoing, and then we push them in one way, and it's like, whoa,
Right.
didn't even realize that was in you.
Right. So that's interesting. So you have an 8 and a 9, which are just really, right next to each other on this chart, but there's a lot of differences between them.
Yes, there
So it's
are.
not like as we go around the circle, doesn't necessarily mean that we're increasing in degrees of these different characteristics from one number to the next or one category to the next.
Ask, how cool of you to pick that up.
Yeah.
Because that's really, I think some people go, wow, this is all the power and control triad, and the 9 is related to the 8, or the 9 is related to the 1. I don't get that. But it's all about what we do with the sense of needing power and control in our lives. And so the expression of power and control for a 9 might be to dig their feet in and not budge.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So the 1 is called the perfectionist or reformer. And their focus of attention, or where they pay attention, is to a need for correcting the world. And and the need for improvement. And so ones have a sense of anger that the world isn't the way that it should be, that it could be made so much better than it is. But because of this need to be seen as good and right and doing the right thing, what they do with this anger, because this anger is just a primary way of expressing a need for power and control, is they repress it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be around one and experience kind of this sense that they're living with a low level of frustration or irritation all the time, and they believe that nobody else is seeing that perhaps, but it's pretty evident.
Okay.
And now we move into our heart triad, and our types 2s, 3s, and 4s are what we call the unmet need for being seen or image, or having an image.
Yeah.
And so our 2s express their need for this by giving to other people. They're called the giver or the helper. And their focus of attention is just kind of an automatic on what other people need. So you might say, how is a 2 and a 9? How are they different? Because the 9s focus on, wanting to get along with other people, and the 2s are you're saying something similar about the 2s.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some similarities. We have many types on the Enneagram when we study more in a more significant way that we call lookalike types. But the 2s basically know what they want. They're just kind of either embarrassed or they have a sense of neediness for asking for what they want, because they believe that in doing so they may rupture the relationship. They also have a deep desire to stay connected with other people, but not by melding with them or avoiding conflict so much, although 2 is a pretty conflict avoidant type, but more by focusing, what do you want to do today? What's important to you? What holds value to you? Before I was Enneagram trained, I was teaching and training about addictions all around the country. And at the very end of my presentation, this automatic response is, has this held value for you? What value has this held for you? That was so crucially important to me, and I had no clue that was part of my character structure of being a type 2.
And you're a type 2.
I am a type 2, yes. I identify with type 2, yeah.
Yeah, when you were describing them, it seemed like a type 2 was a little bit more outward focused on the giving and the helping, whereas the 9 was a little bit more internally focused on not rocking the boat. Like they're a little bit more passive in their need to accommodate.
There's a lot of truth to that. And remind me when we're done, I'll talk a little bit about subtypes, the word subtypes, because there's just a little variation of that. We're talking about a very primary introduction to the Enneagram.
Oh, I'm sure,
here.
yeah.
So our type 3s are called performers, and we see a lot of athletes. They're very competitive, and they're image conscious based on seeing themselves as a reflection of what they do. So being industrious and effective and productive are really, really important qualities for type 3. And their self-esteem is totally based on that. So when there's nothing to do the next day on their day planner or on their iPhone calendar, and they see that there's nothing to do, it's like they panic. Because it's all about, what do I have to do? What can I accomplish? We call them the human doings versus the human beings.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they do a lot. They get a lot done. And just interestingly, every country has a type, and the U.S. is a type 3. It's just get her done.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so we are a country of, when you've traveled elsewhere, you see all these people who take it easy, and they're not as focused on being we have a workaholism ethic in our family, in our country. Yeah. And this is the expression of type 3. And what they do with emotions, by the way, because they're heart types. So the 2s, going back to the 2s for just a minute, the 2s focus on other people's emotions and not their own. And they're pretty accurate, which is even more frightening. They can kind of seem to be able to sink into other people's emotions. The 3s are very sensitive people, but that you wouldn't see it in the workplace, and you wouldn't see it unless you were a part of their inner circle, because emotions are considered messy, and they get in the way of getting things done.
Right.
And so you really kind of have to set them aside so that you can get your stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. When you were talking about the countries having their different types, I I lived in Mexico for 3 months, and there was a saying down there that in the U.S. you guys live to work. In Mexico, we work to live.
Yes.
So you go to work so that you can just earn enough money to go live your life. In the U.S., it's differently. You wake up and your whole life is based around work. And that was interesting that you could basically, the concept there was that the entire country is like that in Mexico, and the entire country of the United States is different. And that always resonated with me. But when you said, yeah, countries have types, I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds about right.
There
That's
you
in
go.
alignment with what they taught me down there.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, and the last of our heart types is called the romantic.
Okay.
And they are deeply aware of their emotions, so much so that there's a love affair with emotionality. A lot of people might see them as very dramatic. We might see them expressed as artists, but usually in some form of creativity. They value uniqueness and authenticity. They may look self-absorbed, but there's a lot of energy that it takes to stay with emotionality, especially in a culture such as ours.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they're accused of being ridiculously sensitive, but there are other types that others might accuse of being particularly sensitive on the Enneagram too. Our romantics, as my teacher a long time ago shared this phrase with me, and I think it's the best phrase ever. She said, this type basks in the deliciousness of sweet melancholy.
So, yeah, I know the types, yeah.
So they have just a love affair with the emotionality, and it's not just positive emotions, it's just emotional expression.
Yeah, it's those people who want to go sit at a coffee shop in the rain with their scarf on and just be depressed, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, right. That's right. You pegged him.
Yeah, I got him. I know him. I'm thinking of somebody specifically. Yeah, so that's funny.
And then moving into our head types, the types that are seeking safety, security, and certainty, and had an unmet childhood need of feeling safe, that kind of moved into the forefront. The three expressions are 5, 6, and 7. And our 5 is considered, we call them oftentimes our investigator. And they gather information. They see information as power. They see information as a way to keep themselves safe. They might gather so much information or be so preoccupied with gathering information that they may not complete a lot of projects. I was telling you earlier that I also have a son that's an attorney, and he was just an incredibly bright kid, and he would turn in a paper, and I'd say, your paper's done. He goes, no, I have to turn the paper in. The paper's really not done. I could probably research this for, the next week and still find that there's just more information about this that I'm really, really interested in. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they are seen as kind of withdrawn. They can be kind of loners. They're really, really deeply sensitive. Actually have some neurobiological experimentation done with 5s, the first type, that this was done with as little infants, where their sensate awareness was just peaked higher than other babies. And the other characteristic in the story of this child is that, in first grade he would answer 9 out of 10 questions. His first grade, 9 out of 10 questions, because he knew 9 questions would also give him an A. Mm-hmm. And he said, why waste my time answering the 10th question when I already have an A?
Right.
I was like, how do you know that in first grade?
Yeah.
That's just, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're really, really bright. I mean, this child was accepted to, William and Mary, NYU, Cornell, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, all of them, yeah.
It was just a cakewalk for him. But he didn't see it that way. They're usually not, when you speak to them, they may seem a little arrogant, but it's really more because they just want to share information, because that's their way of relating to you.
Interesting.
Our 6s have a phobic and counterphobic stance with fear, and what they do is they either move away from fear or they plunge through it. So, and every type actually has that, if we were to talk about more advanced Enneagram expressions, but this is the type that we see that most often with. And the 6s have a particular relationship with either being pro-authority or kind of rebellious against authority. The pro-authority is coming from a backing away from fear, and the plunging through authority or the counterphobic stance is expressed in that way. And they are second guessing and self doubting and indecisive, and will tend to look at anything that could potentially go wrong in a situation. They're really great to have when you're trying to do damage control in a particular area.
Assess risk and
Yes, assess risk. Great summary.
yeah.
And our sevens, our last type, are called our epicures. I happen to be married to one.
Yeah.
He's delightful and funny and wants to adventure and try everything. That was what I was telling you I was mistyped at as a while back. And they love being in on the beginning of things. Sometimes they can lack the stay with it. They can be funny, and if you're having a party, you definitely want a 7 there because they bring the fun with them. And they have an aversion to fear, and the way that they deal with fear is by choosing only the positive emotions. So when they're suffering and pain that needs to be addressed, grieving, we all grieve some point in our life, they have a really hard time going there. They are terrific for reframing things and staying with a situation topically or superficially as a means of avoiding going into their pain. Because all the avoidance of each one of these types, and we didn't really talk about each of the avoidances, has that type feeling like they're not going to survive. That's how strongly wired that personality characteristic is. So.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of information, and I can see how it can be a little bit difficult to identify, because as you were going through them, I'm thinking to myself, what am I? Right? That's obviously what I was doing and probably what some of the listeners are doing. And I can see here from a number of them, there's like different qualities that I think, yeah, that sounds like me. But then you go to the next one, like that also sounds like me, and that one does too. But it's a bit of a process, I would imagine.
Yes, and just thinking about those kinds of things has you thinking about yourself.
Right.
That's the whole idea. We're so unaware of how we are in the world. So anything that can bring our attention inward and have us examining ourselves is helpful.
Right. So what's the benefit of this then? So that's actually a great segue. So yes, you have people who go through, they do the narrative, they do an online test or whatever they need to do to identify what type they are. What practical use is that to people?
There are so many practical uses. So just organically, self-awareness happens. Our respect for other human beings happens. Our tolerance for the differences between human beings happens. So those are just kind of the organic experiences. The Enneagram has a huge following in business. Because in the business community, and I'll use the risk assessment that you brought up, if you have a team where you need risk assessors and you don't have a risk assessor, you have a big problem going on.
Okay.
Or you have a team where you have nobody that really has the warmth to deal with customer relations.
Yeah.
And they have great products, but they have really poor customer relations, then you have a big problem going on. Or if you have a leader who happens to be a type 2 like myself and just really wants to be liked versus to set the stage for what needs to be done in the business, sometimes stuff doesn't get accomplished.
Okay, so that self-awareness will give you an idea of where maybe your strengths are and some of your deficiencies, and then by knowing that, you can address those deficiencies.
And I have a particular interest in 3 areas of the Enneagram that are kind of the summary of all the elemental Ps. And that is relationships, the relationship to self and relationships with others. So marriages and people who are just trying to get to know themselves better. Addictions, because I've worked in the addictions community the entire time I've been a therapist. And wellness, because there are all sorts of obstacles to why people don't get well. And you certainly wouldn't even, suggest that somebody follow the same exercise routine or eating plan if they were a particular type. They're just not going to follow through.
That's fascinating. So, do you see patterns in those areas? So, do you see, say for example, with the addiction stuff, are people typically falling into one of these categories, or is it across the board, across the spectrum?
Well, certain addictions pair up with certain types. So, for instance, let's just choose a type, and I'll respond to that.
Pick any category.
Any type.
How about the threes, the performers?
Well, the threes want to perform, so they're certainly not going to be a lot of pot smokers.
Okay.
It's going to impact. It may be, if they did, it would be CBD oil without any effect, because it's going to affect their efficiency and productivity.
Mm-hmm.
They're more likely going to be cocaine abusers,
Yeah.
amphetamine abusers of some sort. Alcohol, by the way, is the equal opportunity destroyer of all the types.
All of them.
We can talk about that because it's the only illusory drug. A three might have a tendency to be a workout fanatic and just not stop. I mean, body image stuff and
Yeah.
looking good is really, really important. Sexually acting out and seeing what they can get away with is oftentimes a three characteristic. Action-seeking gambling is poker or sports.
Yeah.
Betting on themselves for skill on sports is oftentimes an addiction that you would see with threes. So you wouldn't see that show up necessarily in all the other types.
Interesting. So you can kind of go around the circle
Yes.
and identify where the addiction may
Yes.
come in. Does that speak to the concept of addiction in general? The idea that maybe the addictiveness that somebody has, those tendencies, is going to address one of those lacking areas of that category type. So, for example, the heads are lacking safety and security. Does that relate to the So when I think of addiction or using substances to alter your mindset or to alter your reality, it's to numb something away. It's to get rid of something that is causing you concern. If you've got a lot of problems with security or safety, you're not thinking about security and safety if you're going and getting loaded every night and drinking that away. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing those relationships?
If I understand the question right, I'll answer it, and then you can tell me whether or not
it was an inartful question. I'm kind of musing. I'm trying to think about the relationship between the problems or the three different categories, head, body, and heart, where they're lacking something, that being seen or heard, or the head and security. Is there a relationship between those kind of holes in their personalities and what they're doing in their addiction to fill those holes?
Yes. There is a relationship between what they might be drawn to do strategically to fill those holes. And that being said, not everybody that uses any particular substance becomes addicted. So we really need to take into consideration the predisposition based on genetics and cultural kinds of concerns, especially when we look at like Native Americans who don't have the enzyme to metabolize alcohol. They're sitting ducks regardless of type.
Right.
Yes, and the other thing that I think is important to recognize, just to be prudent in speaking about addictions, is that you might start out addicted to something and continue to play junior pharmacologist with yourself in order to function in life. So let's just use an example of a type 8. They may be totally drawn to more and more and more amphetamines, cocaine. Let's get her done. I want more energy. I like this lustful platform. And in knowing that they have to go to work the next day, alcohol may be abused, pot may be abused, but that's really more circumstantial to manage trying to show up in life in the best way possible, and not their primary drive for what they want to mood alter or why they want to mood alter.
Mm-hmm. And the same with wellness, right? So this was interesting to me. I had not thought about that, but this idea that you would craft a workout plan for a particular type.
Yes.
I haven't seen that. I mean, I go to the gym a lot, but I have not seen that in modern literature. It's sort of a one-size-fits-all meal plan, or everybody should be doing keto, or everybody should be doing paleo. But it's not a one-size-fits-all person that you're working with.
No. And that really occurred to me. I've been just, again, if my primary question growing up was, why don't people get well? Obviously, exercise and nutrition and all that kind of stuff had a whole lot to do with kind of figuring out how that fit in. But in working in the addictions industry, as long as I have, when we were preparing aftercare plans for people to leave residential treatment, and we'd have, let's say, a type 9 who had absolutely no intention of following through with anything, and would smile to your face and say, "Okay,
Right.
what do you think I should do?"
Right. That's the
You know?
peacemaker, the one who
That's
just
right,
goes along
that's
with
right.
anything.
And they also are the type who are really exercise resistant. They're the type that knows they need to exercise, and it's not all nines. These are just gross stereotypes.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yes, and with the greater self-awareness, all these things shift. So they're the type that would like sit on the couch and wait for the urge to exercise just kind of fades away. And that
Yeah.
would be how they would cope with exercising. But let's say, just using an example of nutrition, a type 9 is so easily distracted and really just wants to go along with everybody else. So if they found that there were certain foods that were really important for them to have in their life and their spouse didn't like those foods, it might be really helpful for a physician or somebody or a trainer to intervene and say, look, your spouse needs to be eating these particular foods and is real reluctant to bring them into the house because of your disapproval or the fact that you're kind enough to make dinner every night and maybe
Right.
you don't want to do that. And we could go on and on and on. And when we look at that, I don't want to come off as it being quite that simplistic, because we also have to take into account, allergies and cultural influences and predisposed genetic issues and things like that. But this is so helpful when you start to consider things.
Well,
like
it just changes the paradigm a little bit. If you can say, okay, yes, I am a type, pick one, and it may be a little bit more difficult for me to follow a workout plan or an eating regimen that was designed for a different type or designed by a different type. And this is a performer. This is a number 3 who says, this works for me. I love getting up and going and grinding and grinding and grinding. I'll go every day. So this plan worked for me. So it must work for the peacemaker or for the investigator or any of those other things. You can see it's probably going to be a bad mismatch.
That's the best example you could give, because the type 3s are more likely to be personal trainers than any other
I'm
type.
sure they are. That's kind of what I was figuring. How about relationships? So how about like finding love? So, I think of the horoscopes, right? A Leo shouldn't be with this or whatever those are. I don't know those well at all. But are there certain relationships types that work better than others?
The answer to that is simply a healthy version of any type gets along with a healthy version of any other type.
That's great.
And so if you were to look at each one of these types in a more advanced way, we have ways of looking at levels of development, moderate levels of development, lower levels, and higher expressions of that particular type. If you were a higher expression, let's say of type 3, and you met a type 7 who has lots of energy and likes lots of options and may look like it would be a good fit for you, but they were just not aware at all, and you were a higher level of expression. The rule of relationships is that a relationship can never be any healthier than the least healthy person in that relationship.
Okay.
So that's a problem.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice in general. But the good news is if you can work on yourself and be healthy, then you're compatible with all of them. If you can find somebody who's also doing the same.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many of my girlfriends have said, don't you think you should start like a dating site with this? This would be like the best thing in the world.
Well, it's funny because I've been in relationships. I was in a relationship once, and this gal asked me to take the test on, I think it was Myers-Briggs on 16personalities.com or whatever that website is. And, we were comparing results, and basically she had asked me to do this almost at the beginning of the relationship. And I had a strong feeling she would never admit it, but if I didn't get the type that she wanted, or if I got the type that said, that was, an opposite of hers, that may have been the end of it. And, I think people can be a little overly selective in these things. They can take a test and they can say, well, that test didn't work out for me, or that person's a Leo or a Virgo or a Capricorn or whatever. Therefore, they're not compatible with my type, and close the door before it's even been explored, and kind of sell themselves short a little bit on that.
Right.
And that's not happening here.
No, in fact, this is one of the aspects of my love affair with the Enneagram, is that it's a path for wholeness. It's a path that says, okay, these patterns, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
These are patterns that were created early on. They were meant to help preserve my life, help me thrive and strive in my life. So the best I can do is to recognize them and really promote the ones that are great and are assets, and the ones that are challenges or obstacles for my growth, to learn to stand back, embrace them. Don't fight them, because the ego gets really crazy and strong when you start to fight or try to get rid of a part of it. Soften it, be open to it, embrace it, love it, heal it. It's the kindest method of study I've ever been introduced to.
That's interesting. And you've been, at the outset, you said that this had really kind of shifted your whole perspective on all of the other modalities that you were trained in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, even the coaching school that I went to had a track for the Enneagram in Tucson. I went to the Integrative Institute for Coaching, and they have a track for the Enneagram there. And that's one of the reasons I chose that particular school.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've been so trained in this. Is it a faux pas? Is it something, if I ask you to categorize somebody, are you allowed to do that?
Categorize? You mean a celebrity or somebody?
Somebody like that. Is that something?
I would prefer not to do that.
You don't do that?
I mean, I might do that in my head, but I wouldn't do that.
You don't do that, yeah. I understand. Okay. I was just curious, because I had some people I was curious. As you were going through this, I was trying to think, who can I identify that I think would fit into that category? But we'll leave that for an offline discussion.
There you go.
Yeah, because I am curious. I'm sure you can do it. I know you can do it. I'm not going to ask you that. All right. So what about if somebody says, all right, this sounds like it's something that I need, or I'm interested in, what's the process look like? So they would contact you, they would go through some sort of analysis, and then what is the program after that?
So I do a series of Enneagram trainings, but there are plenty of excellent Enneagram teachers in and around this area too. And most of us work online, so that distance is really not an issue. If anybody wants to do Enneagram typing of themselves, if anybody wants to do relationship work, wellness work, or addictions work, I would be a great person to work with you. And I'd also be happy if you want a teacher or somebody to work with in another area to refer you to an Enneagram colleague. What I'm doing specifically right now, which I feel is really an important contribution that I can make that perhaps others cannot to the Enneagram community, is I have, and I believe the URL for my website and the program is offered. I'm working with counselors and coaches who are working in the field of addictions to bring this into the addictions community, because it is a game changer. I was working with about 200 people every week impacted by addictions using the Enneagram, and our client results were unbelievable compared to what they were prior to my bringing the Enneagram in my practice. And my agency, when it was opened, the collaboration and the interdependence that was developed with all the people in the agency was also a game changer. They looked to each other for skills that they didn't even know until they typed themselves that they had innately, that they wanted to donate to the group effort as a whole. So those kinds of things that go into corporations too, depending on what the corporation is and what the mission is. But I think you're going to let everybody know how to reach me. And if you have any Enneagram interests and I don't provide them specifically, I'll be happy to refer you to somebody that does.
Yeah, we got connected through our family foundation, through my mom, and through this addiction, I think, kind of purview that your practice is focused on. Why do you think so? If your results, if your success is so profound, why is this not being used? We spoke about this very briefly before we hopped on the air, but you had said that the results from traditional addiction therapy has not changed in 40 years.
That's correct.
And this tool has proven to be so powerful. Why is this not being utilized more? Or is that part of what your mission is?
I think that's my mission. I wish I could answer that question with a better answer than I don't know. The word is a strange word. I tried for a while calling myself Nine Paths because I figured 9 paths is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And then I thought, no, that's just really kind of diluting the Enneagram. And not only that, in the last year, the Enneagram has gone freaking viral. I mean, there's a millenniagram, and the Enneagram, if you were to Google Enneagram right now and look at videos and things like that, and you'd be blown away by what's out there. So the timing is really, really good right now, and it is my mission to bring the Enneagram into the addictions community to heal relationships and help wellness concerns.
Yeah, I think that's awesome that you're doing that. I have a program that I do. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I have a program where I go to treatment and recovery centers and give them a talk on criminal law and help them clear off their criminal records. It's called Clean Slate Sobriety. And I've been to a number of these different facilities just to have conversations with them, see if they'd be interested in the program. And not once, ever, have I heard of one of them having anything to do with not only the Enneagram as one of their modalities. They have a million different modalities, horse therapy and EMDR and all of these other things. Enneagram has never been on that menu of items, but not just the Enneagram. None of that stuff has been on there. Any of the Myers-Briggs, any of the personality, any of that kind of introspective analysis that people do on themselves to learn a little bit more about themselves has not been in that. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. Do you think that right now it's simply an awareness thing? They don't know about these results or about this tool? Or do you think they know about it, they're just hesitant to incorporate it into their methodology?
Well, I think there's a variety of factors. First of all, when someone's in really, really early recovery, taking direction, going to meetings, getting a sponsor, some of the very, very basic things don't really leave a lot of room for introspection.
Mm-hmm.
Introspection is really something. It's like, the first time somebody goes to an AA meeting, oh, I'm not like anybody in this room.
Right.
And then after you're there for 6 months, it's like, oh my God, I love the unity of this program. Right. That guy that's got no teeth in there could be my best friend, and we'll give him a hug. And so their unity, instead of looking at the separation, there's a sense of unity. And that's clearly a result of introspection, self-awareness, and denial melting, right?
Yeah.
Where the Enneagram absolutely has incredible utility from the get-go in addictions treatment centers and in any healthcare institute. We've actually taken this, some people have taken this into the court systems too, is looking at the bias through which the provider comes, when I come into a situation, I bring myself.
Mm-hmm.
I bring my two-ness. I bring my lens of two-ness. But when I know that I'm doing that, and I have room for people not sharing that same bias, or I see how my bias may impact the clinical outcomes, that's the game changer that I want to do for the counselors and coaches and at the outset, and then people in long-term recovery. My husband, for instance, he had 30 years and he was introduced to the Enneagram. He said, I have never catapulted in my level of change in the way that I did after being introduced to the Enneagram.
Well, it's the same concept that we spoke about earlier about putting together an exercise plan or a nutrition plan for a personality type who may not be receptive to the plan, who was designed by somebody else. There's just a fundamental mismatch there.
Yes.
And it sounds like you're doing the same thing with something that in most cases when it comes to addiction is a life or death type of situation.
Yeah.
It's not this question of whether you're going to lose 10 pounds or not, or I probably shouldn't be eating Big Macs every day. It's not about that. It's about somebody literally dying or dying by suicide or overdosing or getting in trouble with the law and dying in prison. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that's very serious, but I think too often people are, at least in these treatment centers or facilities, they have a system that they think works, and they're not willing to step back and be introspective about it and say, well, who designed this? Why did they design it? What was the purpose of the design? And it's a battle. You're going up against a lot of really entrenched resources and sort of traditional schools of thought on this works because we've been doing it for 30 years or 70 years or 100 years or whatever.
Right.
Some psychologists back in the 1920s said this is how we do it. This is how we do it.
Right.
And I applaud you on that.
Yeah, I mean, CBT, which is the most evidence-based best practice of all treatment modalities for counseling,
Mm-hmm.
requires introspection, and you get somebody early in recovery who has no introspection. It's like, how do you claim
Right.
how do you claim that that's the most effective thing that you can conceivably do with a
Right.
person in early recovery?
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, we dove into a lot. That hour flew by. I could talk to you for another couple, I'm sure. So, two things. One, people can find you at your website, yourpurepotential.com, right? And it's spelled yourpurepotential.com. What would they be contacting you for, just so I'm clear on that?
If they're looking for somebody to work with them in any Enneagram issue, I may or may not be the appropriate person, but I can certainly send them on to somebody if they have any interest in doing Enneagram work. Right now, there is a link on my site to take a 1-hour webinar for those counselors and coaches who want to bring the Enneagram into their treatment communities, and that's followed up by a coaching offer to do some group coaching with me, a 10-week coaching program that starts in the middle of August. You'll also find lots and lots of resources on the site that really go into more detail about some of these concepts on the Enneagram. And relationship work, speaking, usually anything Enneagram related. If I can do it, I will. If I can't, and I have just exposure to a ton of colleagues, the Arizona Enneagram Association is a wonderful organization that has lots of trainers and speakers too.
Yeah, and you've got a robust email platform that you get. My mom forwards them to me all the time. But you really have a very strong program and some great resources. You're also on LinkedIn at Renée Siegel. You're on Instagram at Enneagram Resources, and people can connect with you on Facebook as well at Renée Siegel.
That's correct.
Well, Renee, I had a fascinating conversation with you today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I would encourage everybody to connect with you, and I will certainly be following you along in your journey because I think we're aligned in a lot of ways.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on your podcast.
Thank you. We'll do it again.
Okay. Take care.
You too.